know how exciting this particular episode will be, Mark Clifton.
Probably not any more exciting than the other 270. So we got a pretty low bar.
Well, this one, Mark, is about autopsies.
Yes.
And
yes.
This one is about death and dying and those types of things. By the way,
Yep.
If you type in churchmortician.com, you know what comes up?
I have no idea.
Church Answers.
Is that right? So you're good
Yes.
at killing. You're good at killing churches. Is that right?
Yeah, I hope I'm better at doing autopsies on churches that have died so churches can live by learning from these churches.
Oh, I understand. All right. That's good. You know, there are people right now who are Googling churchmortician.com, actually. And you still have that. You still have that. You still have that.
Oh, yeah.
That
It'll take them right to Church Answers.
Oh, it'll take them right to Church Answers. All right. Very
yes.
good.
See, what happened was another dearly departed person by the name of Jonathan Howe. He's not deceased. He went with the Southern Baptist Agency as well.
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did. We were really in the throes of Autopsy of a Deceased Church, the book, and promoting it. And he said, you talk about autopsy so much, you're kind of like a mortician. And so we're going to get this URL, and eventually it was originally forwarded to my site, thomrainer.com, and then churchanswers.com is where it is. Trivial information, but there's a little bit of it.
Well,
but Mark, when that book first came out,
yep,
go on.
I'm listening. No, go ahead. I'm listening.
When that book first came out, Mark, it really struck a nerve, and went to number one on the bestsellers charts. He says rather immodestly, but just really took off. And guess what?
What?
The book is, even though it's that many years old, it's on a new sales growth curve. It has come back. It has come back again.
Well, three reasons for that. Number one, there's a lot of dying churches, thousands of them, tens of thousands that are in the process. So that's number one. Number two, the title is really good. I mean, Autopsy of a Deceased Church is not your normal Christian bookstore title. All right, that does catch your attention. And then thirdly, it's very simple, very direct, very easy to read. Everybody in your church can read it. It's not a heavy lift. It's just kind of like listening to you. It's just pleasant and easy to read, and not a heavy lift. No, it's really good. I use it all the time, Dr. Rainer. And I think the better of the two books is Anatomy of a Revived Church. They're both good.
That's the more hopeful book for sure.
Yeah, that's the follow-up. But I think every church, just like I think every church should go through, I'm a church member, then I think every church should do those other two as well. And I lead churches through those things, by the way. So anyway.
Well, you're kind. Thank you for saying that.
Well, it's true. And I'm sure you lead churches. I'm sure you lead churches through my book too, Reclaiming Glory. I'm sure you remember. I did write one.
I haven't led churches through it, but I've recommended it in many places. So,
like I said,
yes.
I do tell people that between you and I, we've written 41 books together. So, or 41 books total, I should say. I've written one, you've written 40. So it works out.
Well, you're exactly. Yes, I just finished number 40. So you're exactly right. Not all 40 are published, but they will be shortly.
All right.
So, Mark,
very good.
Jana in the Church Answers office received a phone call this week, and it was from a pastor. And he said, I got to get that book about dead churches. And she said, I think you're referring to Autopsy of a Deceased Church. Yeah. Tell me where to get it. And so she told him where to get it. And she mentioned to him that we have Church Answers has a video resource coming out in January about the book. He said, I can't wait to January. We might be dead before then. That was the sense of urgency. For those of you who are not watching this contemporaneous with the release date, we are in November, and he was saying we don't even have till January to make some major changes.
Wow.
So It inspired me to do this podcast with my co-mortician, the International Harvester. That is a mixed metaphor if I've ever heard one. Co-mortician and International Harvester. To talk about this issue of the death of churches. You and I, sadly, have watched many churches die. You and absolutely. I, sadly, have predicted without significant changes, the churches will die.
Right.
We never say that a church won't make it, because if God can save any person, he can save any church. But we will say, unless significant changes are made, the church is about to die. And that's who we're talking to, Mark, today. We're talking to these leaders whose churches may be declining precipitously. We don't want to do this without hope. We want to do this podcast with hope, but a warning at the same time. So that's my introduction. And I am going to shut up and go back to my introverted self and listen to your extroverted self in just a minute.
All right.
So
All right.
Here's the first point that I just want you to elaborate on. Every church is doing one of two things. It's moving toward greater vibrancy, or it's declining and dying. One of those two.
Yeah, and I think people need to understand that. Sometimes they think, well, we're just holding our own. We're just being stagnant. We may be growing a little bit, but maybe declining a little bit. You really didn't need to know what is the trajectory of your church. And Dr. Rayner, you don't know that week to week. I mean, you can't say, hey, we had a good week this week, so we're really growing, or we had a bad month this. Talk to them a little bit about, in your experience, how you can determine what the trajectory of a church really is. Because what you're saying there is every church is on a trajectory, either growing, and not necessarily numerically growing. I don't mean that. If that's the case, then you're going to get infinitely large if you get bigger every year. But I mean, are you reaching new people? Are you making disciples? Is there church health? Those kinds of things. So how do you judge that over what time period? How does a pastor look at that and say, is our trajectory up, or is our trajectory down?
Before COVID, I used to say, look at a 5-year time period and go back 5 years and see where you are. Post-COVID, I say 2 years, because things are moving. Because things are moving so quickly now. So today I say 2 years. Now, what do you look for? There's different metrics. I mean, we have to look at metrics just because everything else is intuitive. But there's obviously attendance. There's the worship attendance. There are other things. How many people are involved in ministry or in groups? That's a sign of health. How many new people are we reaching? How many people are visiting our church?
Right.
You can go to different metrics of health. We've written plenty about them, but they're all going to be indicators of the trajectory of the church.
Yeah, and I really think you need to look at that one. How many new people are attending, and how many new people are we engaging? Because your membership, you're going to lose members through illness. Some of them are going to become ill and have to go into a care center, older people. Some are going to have to go move in with their children. Some are going to pass away. So you're going to lose members from that. And then we're just in a very transient society. You're going to lose members who have to move for their jobs and leave town, or leave the particular part of the community that you're in. So not necessarily always looking at numerical growth, but looking at the new people that you're reaching. And are there new people coming or not? And when was the last time you had a visitor come in? When was the last time someone joined your church? Those kinds of things. And you and I both, I mean, I'm working with a church right now that, Dr. Rayner, and it's not a small church. I mean, it's a church in a city, but in the last 5 years, they've had 2 baptisms.
Wow.
And so that trajectory is not strong. I mean, that's just the last 2 years, none. Since COVID, none. And so no new members to speak, no new members either in the last 2 years. So
you often speak of Warnell and your experience there. And I recently saw a post of you looking back, and not looking back, but looking at the present now and how vibrant it is. Yeah. The work you did on restarting it, and then those who followed you and making it stronger. Those are great stories. You've heard my story numerous times about the Church of First Merle in southern Indiana, because Merle was the only deacon, the only personnel member, the only search committee member, and his wife was the only instrumentalist. So I always called it the Church of First Merle. We look at those churches and we look back and we see that a church that is dying can turn around. Oh, churches that are not turning around are often in denial. That is our second point, and it is such a big one that we're actually going to do a full podcast on it following this one. Good. So, but let's talk about the whole issue of denial. You cannot change until you admit that there's a problem, correct?
Right. And I think one of the reasons dying churches and the membership of dying churches have a difficult time admitting, hey, we are dying, is that unfortunately, and I think not appropriately, they feel shame about that. And so they don't want to acknowledge that we're dying because that sort of makes them feel shameful that we've messed up, we've done something wrong. And I just think sometimes the community has changed drastically. There have been all kinds of other issues that have taken place. Maybe you didn't adjust to them as quickly as you should have, but let's just go with the reality that your heart was in the right place. You just weren't doing the right things. And if we can get past the shaming part and say, okay, but what can you do right now? And let me give you, again, an example of Warnell Road Baptist Church in Kansas City. There were 18 elderly folks the first Sunday I showed up in a sanctuary that seated 600. I worked there for 7 or 8, 10 years, I guess, and maybe we got to 150, probably more like 100, 120 on most Sundays. And I left, and I've been gone now for 7 years. But like you say, I went back a week ago, and I posted it on Facebook. The building was filled. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was filled, and it was filled with all kinds of people: older people, younger people, children, lots and lots and lots of children. And I didn't know anybody hardly. There was a handful of people there I knew. And as soon as I sat down, this young man came up and gave me a bulletin and thanked me for being here and asked me if I'd ever been here before. But here's the reality, all right? Those 18 people, they felt so bad that a church that had a 100-year history, and they were the ones that had to basically make the tough decision to say, okay, it can no longer be the Warnell Road we knew. And we either have to close this thing down or we have to make some drastic changes. And they felt like a failure for a while. Now, most of those 18 have gone on to heaven because that was 2005 or 6 when I went there. So most of them were in their 70s or 80s then. And as I was at Warnell last Sunday and I saw all of those young families, all that church filled with people, I thought, those 18 people were the most important people maybe in the history of that church because they made the right decision. And long after they're in heaven, that church continues. So rather than to feel shameful, like, oh man, we've failed, see it as an opportunity to really pivot and do what Jesus wants you to do with his church and make some of the best decisions for the future of that church. You may be entrusted with some of the best decisions. So don't feel shameful and don't be in denial, but rather embrace it and say, man, God has chosen us for this day, and we get to determine under his leadership how this church is going to continue after we go to heaven. And that's a pretty neat thing. So, but you're right, denial. I have gone to so many churches, Thom, and you have too. Call us in to do an assessment, and the first thing they say to me is, we're not one of those dying churches. I don't have that problem, and it's real hard to get past that at first. So, and sometimes it takes years. You have to just let them go and say, okay, if you don't think you're dying, you told me one time, and I've experienced it too. You've actually laid out the church numbers, the history, 5-10 year history, and you grafted it, and you said, look, you guys are going down, and you've had people look at you and say, no, those numbers aren't right. And you go, well, they're your numbers, you gave them to me. Well, that can't be right. That can't be right. Even that kind of denial, that can't be right. So I get it totally. Yep.
Well, one thing that churches can do on a positive note is learn your community. Most churches think that their community is different than it really is. I mean, they have this view of the community, and then they say, we have a demographic psychography report, personally my favorite because it's Church Answers, called Know Your Community. And people will look at that report. I'll get Amy to put it in the show notes. People will look at that report, and they will say, I had no idea about our community. I didn't know we had this many single moms. I didn't know that we were this ethnically diverse. And it just opens their eyes. It helps move them toward denial if they will look at it. But Mark, I want to go to a typical Clifton-esque situation. You walk into a church, they want to meet with you because you are Mr. Revitalize and Replant globally, everywhere. I mean, you get mobbed in airports. You are the man. And so they call you in, and they are going to expect some profundity of wisdom emanating from your vocal cords. And you begin to sit down with them, and they admit that they're declining, but you look at them and you realize you're not declining. You're getting close to death. And especially in the post-COVID world, many of these churches think they have a lot more time than they do. And sometimes they won't admit it until, as you have said before, there's no one left to replace the light bulb. They don't have that much time these days.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a church that I was working with, and another friend of mine was working with for a number of years. And it was just in a metropolitan area down to a handful of elderly people. And every time he would go visit with them, he was a denominational leader, and he would offer them some opportunities to partner with other churches to ensure that they would have a life. Oh, no, we got it. We got it. We just need to find the right pastor. We'll talk about that in a minute. But no, we got it. And he said he just got really frustrated, but he loved him and cared for him and kept visiting them every year or so. And no, we're fine. And, they were just the same little handful of people, and the community was just growing all around him. He said one day he got a phone call from one of those men. He said, I think we want to meet with you down at the church. So he went down there, and there were 3 or 4 elderly men, 3 or 4 elderly women there. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being elderly. All right, Thom? I mean, I'm embracing it. So
I embrace it wholeheartedly. The one that many years ago I wasn't, but I am.
Yeah, I'm loving it. Anyway, but these were 3 elderly men, 3 elderly women or so, and they said, I think we're ready to listen. I think we're ready to make those changes and maybe reach out, maybe let somebody else come in here and do the work here. And this denominational leader thought it must be a real spiritual breakthrough. Man, my message must have finally got through. So he laid it out there. He said, man, what changed your heart? He said, well, none of the 3 of us can get up on a ladder anymore. So
they can't change the light bulb.
Literally, that was it. Literally, when nobody can get on a ladder, well, I guess maybe we do need to turn the thing over. So yeah, just that sense that they have longer than they think they do, and all of them, you don't realize. And I will say this though, I think in some ways, COVID has sped that up. There've been some churches that maybe thought they had 10 years. They came back from COVID, and instead of having whatever they had, 20 or 30 in an urban setting, now they've got 10 or 15, and they go, oh, now wait a minute, now we really do need to do something. So in some ways, COVID pushed them a little further down the road than they would have been anyway, just sped it up a little bit. But yes, denial and thinking we've got longer than we do. Again, just not looking at the real picture of really what's there. And part of that is, the old frog in the kettle thing, right? I've heard you say this, Dr. Rayner, and I've used it many times. They don't think their church is dying because they drive to the same place every week. They park in the same parking lot. They walk in the same door. They go to the same Sunday school class. They sit in the same pew. They see the same people, maybe fewer people, but they still see the same people. And they think, we're not dying. Right. See, we're still here. And yeah, you are actually dying.
Yes. You mentioned something in this point that is a good segue to the next point. Our next point is most dying churches are looking for a silver bullet. You're talking about that conversation that the denominational person was having with the church, and they said something like, we just need to get the right pastor. That is a common silver bullet. If we just get the pastor, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We just hire the right man. We just find the right. I like to say, I've never said it, I don't think. Maybe I have. Probably in a weak moment, I have frustration. I was a lot less patient when I was younger. I've gotten a lot more patient as I've gotten older, but I may have actually said it. Listen, if there was the right pastor, you couldn't afford him and he wouldn't come here. So, they really, their church is completely dysfunctional and just about ready to go. We got to find the right pastor. Well, again, I don't know what you mean by that, but and oftentimes they mean it. They want a young pastor because we don't have any young people. Rather than asking,
it's going to bring them in.
Yeah, rather than asking themselves, why don't we have any young people? What have we done that we shouldn't have done that made this place a place where young people can't flourish? And so, yeah, it's all whatever they say. And of course, the other thing I have said to many churches is, well, you don't need the right pastor. You have the right pastor. His name is Jesus. He's the chief shepherd of your church. If you're not listening to him, you're not going to listen to the under shepherd. And they said, well, you know what we mean. I said, well, I'm not really sure I do. If you think you can hire somebody to fix all of this, if you're not willing, and they always say we're willing to make changes. How many times, Dr. Rayner, have you and I had a conversation with a pastor who's in a place and he's about 2 or 3 years into it, and he just feels like he has to leave. The pressure is beyond belief on his family. Everything's come undone. And one of the first things he says to us is, when I went there, they told me they wanted to change. they wanted me to come in and lead them in change. And as long as it doesn't really change anything, they'd like you to lead them in change or change anything they like. Or they don't even understand the really cost of the change they're asking for until they start to endure it. All those things come into play. And so there is no silver bullet except doing what Jesus tells you to do. And that can be a long, painful process. I remember, Henry Blackaby, this is the 30-year anniversary of experiencing God, and it just came out again. But one of the things about Henry, not only do you see God at work and join him in it, but you have to make adjustments to join him in it. You've got to make adjustments in your life to join him in it. And so, that's the key. It's one thing to say we need to change. It's another thing, how do you make the adjustments toward that change? That's a whole different issue. And many dying churches, they're quick to say, if we just find the right pastor or the right youth leader or something like that. But then they don't really understand all the adjustments that will take place in that. There is no instant change like that. That makes any sense.
I've mentioned this on a number of occasions at Church Answers. We have a community of a little under 2,000 church leaders, a vibrant community, and they talk to each other at our forum called Church Answers Central. It's more than a forum. It's a Q&A where they get subject matter experts. It's got all kind of good stuff in it. And I can't remember how long ago it was. It seems like it's only a few months, but it actually may have been a few years, the way my mind works. One of the topics was, are all search committees liars?
Not intentionally, no.
And of course, then you read the comment. Okay, they told me they wanted change. They told me they were willing to do this. We started initiating it. And now the change they want is they want me gone.
That's the change.
Yeah.
I think anytime a church is looking for a quick answer, they don't realize, look, what I do talk to them, and you do too. You sit down with a church that's in a deep decline and you say, look, the next 3 years are going to be very painful. Either they're going to be painful as you eventually die, or they're going to be painful for you as you eventually make the transition to life. But at the end of 3 years, one of those is going to have a wonderfully happy outcome and the other one isn't. But you can't avoid the fact that for the next few years, there's going to be some significant challenging times for you.
Ooh, I'm gonna put that in my new resource I'm doing in January, since Henry recorded all of them. That's a great comment, Mike. You're a font of wisdom. Hey, come back for this font of wisdom, because we're going to unpack this issue of denial. We put it in the content for this one, but it's just too much on that. So we'll get to some happy podcasts in a minute, but because there's been such a request for, hey, I want to stop my church from dying, we're going to deal with this just a little while longer. So come back for the next podcast, put up with Rayner, celebrate with Clifton, and we'll come back and we'll talk about this issue of denial. We'll see you in the next episode of Revitalize and Replant.